My beloved child, pause here for a moment. Do not rush past these words as though they are ordinary, because what you are about to hear carries the weight of something that has been waiting quietly in the background of your heart. There are moments when a message arrives not because everything is ending, but because something can no longer remain unspoken. And tonight, before midnight becomes another memory, there is a truth connected to your soulmate that deserves to be heard. You may have felt an unusual heaviness lately, a pull you could not explain, a thought of them appearing without warning when you were trying to focus on something else. You may have wondered why their presence still seems to echo through certain quiet moments. There is a reason. Something has shifted inside them, and the words they once kept buried are rising closer to the surface. This is not a message meant to frighten you. It is meant to awaken your attention, because what they are trying to say carries far more emotion than you realize. Stay with this, because the first thing heaven wants you to understand is that their silence has not meant what you thought it meant. You interpreted the distance through the wounds you already carried. You looked at the quiet and wondered whether you had become forgettable. You noticed what they did not say, what they did not explain, what they did not fight hard enough to make clear, and somewhere inside you, you began creating an answer for yourself. Perhaps they stopped caring. Perhaps the connection meant more to you than it ever meant to them. Perhaps you were holding on to something that had already disappeared from their heart. But the truth is more complicated than that. Their silence has been crowded with words. Their distance has been filled with internal conversations. And while you were trying to make peace with not knowing, they were slowly realizing that time does not erase what the heart refuses to dismiss. There was a moment recently when they found themselves thinking about the version of you they never fully understood. Not the version that smiled when things were difficult. Not the version that answered, "I'm fine," because explaining the truth felt exhausting. They began thinking about the quieter version of you, the one who carried disappointments without announcing them, who learned how to continue without receiving every apology, who had to teach yourself how to remain gentle even after life gave you reasons to become guarded. Something about that realization struck them differently. For the first time, they stopped viewing your reactions only through the lens of their own feelings. They began asking themselves what you must have been feeling. And that question opened a door they had avoided for far too long. Listen carefully, because this is where the message becomes deeper. Your soulmate has replayed certain conversations in their mind. Words that once seemed small have become louder in memory. Pauses they once overlooked now feel meaningful. They remember moments when you were clearly trying to say more than your voice allowed. They remember the way you pulled back after feeling misunderstood. They remember the moments when you gave them another chance to see your heart, even though you were afraid they would mishandle it again. And now, with the clarity that often comes too late for comfort, they are beginning to understand what those moments actually meant. They are recognizing that you were not asking for perfection. You were asking for emotional honesty. You were not demanding that they know every answer. You simply wanted them to stop making you feel as though you had to carry the entire connection alone. That realization has unsettled them. Not because you accused them, but because you did not. There are things you could have thrown back in their face. There are memories you could have used to make them feel guilty. There are ways you could have punished them emotionally for every moment they left you wondering. But something in you chose silence instead. You began protecting your peace rather than begging for understanding. And strangely, that is what made them finally begin to understand. When your energy stopped chasing the explanation, they could suddenly hear the echo of everything they had refused to confront. Your absence from certain emotional spaces became louder than your presence had ever been. This is why they are sending what feels like a final message. But do not misunderstand the word final. It does not necessarily mean farewell. Sometimes a final message is the last message written from an old version of someone before they choose whether they are willing to become different. Sometimes it is the last attempt to hide behind pride. Sometimes it is the moment a person finally decides, I cannot keep pretending this does not matter. Your soulmate has reached a threshold inside themselves. They know they cannot continue carrying the same unsaid words into another chapter. They know that if they remain silent much longer, the silence itself may become an answer they never intended to give you. And there is something they desperately want you to know before anything else. You mattered more than their behavior showed. That truth may frustrate you, because love that is hidden poorly can feel indistinguishable from love that is absent. You needed consistency, not invisible feelings. You needed clarity, not secret devotion. Heaven is not asking you to excuse what hurt you simply because another person felt deeply. Feelings do not erase consequences. But understanding the truth can help release you from false conclusions you made about your worth. Their inability to express what they felt was never proof that you were difficult to love. It was proof that they had not yet learned how to hold something meaningful without becoming afraid of what it required from them. There was a fear in them they rarely admitted. Loving you made their future feel real. Before you, they could imagine possibilities without committing emotionally to them. They could tell themselves they had time. They could hide behind distractions, routines, old patterns, and convenient excuses. But you awakened a different kind of awareness. You made them imagine conversations years from now. You made them notice what peace felt like. You made them wonder what it would mean to build instead of simply experience. And for someone who had spent years protecting themselves from emotional uncertainty, that kind of connection did not only feel beautiful. It felt dangerous to the parts of them that had learned to survive by never needing anyone too much. So they pulled away when they should have leaned closer. They became confusing when they should have become honest. They said less when they were feeling more. And because you could not see the storm inside them, all you experienced was the distance it created. That is one of the hardest truths in this message. Two people can care deeply and still wound each other through fear, timing, pride, and misunderstanding. A powerful connection does not automatically create emotional maturity. Sometimes it exposes where maturity is still needed. But tonight, something about them is different. They are tired of hearing their own excuses. They are tired of pretending that what happened between you can be neatly placed in the past. They have tried to distract themselves. They have told themselves they should simply move forward. They may have filled their schedule, talked to others, buried themselves in responsibilities, or convinced people around them that everything was fine. Yet when the noise disappears, there you are again, not as an obsession, not as a fantasy, but as an unresolved truth. A memory of something that deserved more honesty than it received. And there is one moment they keep replaying. It was not necessarily the biggest argument. It may not have looked dramatic from the outside. In fact, that is precisely why it stayed with them. It was one of those quiet moments where something changed without anyone announcing it. You looked at them differently. Perhaps your voice became softer, not because you were at peace, but because you were tired. Perhaps you stopped explaining yourself halfway through. Perhaps you said something simple that they did not understand until much later. The moment ended, life continued, but a part of you withdrew. At the time, they did not realize how significant it was. Now they do. They know that was the moment you began questioning whether your heart was safe with them. And that knowledge has changed the way they remember everything afterward. They are remembering your patience with a tenderness that hurts. They are remembering the chances you gave them to be honest without forcing them. They are remembering the ways you tried to understand their complications while your own feelings remained unanswered. They are realizing that some of the things they once labeled as sensitivity were actually your intuition noticing inconsistency. Some of the moments they thought you were overthinking were moments when you were correctly sensing that something inside them was being withheld. That does not mean every fear you ever had was true. It means you were responding to emotional uncertainty, and uncertainty can make even a strong heart question itself. Your soulmate understands this now in a way they did not before. And they wish they could go back to certain moments and answer you differently. They wish they could replace defensiveness with reassurance. They wish they could tell the truth the first time instead of forcing you to discover meaning from silence. But time does not move backward, my child. It reveals. And what it has revealed to them is something they can no longer ignore. You were not asking them to rescue you. You were asking them to meet you. There is a difference. You had already survived things they never fully knew about. You had already learned how to keep going when people disappointed you. You had already rebuilt parts of yourself in private. What you wanted from them was not salvation. It was companionship. You wanted to know that if you opened your heart, someone would stand inside that sacred space with honesty instead of making you regret that you opened the door. This truth has made them deeply emotional because they now understand something they once missed. Every time you gave them access to your vulnerable side, you were taking a risk they could not see. You may have appeared strong, but strength does not eliminate fear. In fact, some of the strongest people love cautiously because they know exactly what rebuilding costs. Your soulmate now sees that. And there is another truth they have not yet said out loud. They were afraid you would eventually realize you deserved better than the version of them they were giving you. That fear made them behave in the very ways that could cause it to happen. Fear has strange logic. A person becomes terrified of losing someone, then withdraws to avoid feeling vulnerable. They fear rejection, so they create distance. They fear being exposed, so they hide what would have created intimacy. They fear they will not be enough, so they refuse to fully show up and accidentally prove their own fear correct. Your soulmate has begun seeing this pattern in themselves. It is painful because awareness removes the comfort of excuses. Once a person recognizes the pattern, they can no longer pretend that fate alone created the distance. They have to ask themselves what role their own choices played. That is the conversation they are having within themselves tonight. But there is more. This final message is not only about regret. It is about a decision. Your soulmate knows that words alone would not be enough now. They could say they miss you. They could tell you they think about you. They could admit that your connection still matters. But somewhere inside, they know you have reached a point where beautiful words without changed behavior would only reopen an old wound. They know that if they approach you again, they cannot come with the same confusion. So they have been asking themselves a question that terrifies them. Am I truly ready to give what I once expected them to keep waiting for? That question has stopped them in their tracks. Because wanting you is not the same as being ready for you. Missing you is not the same as knowing how to love you. Regretting the past is not the same as being capable of building a different future. And for the first time, they are not only thinking about what they want from you. They are thinking about what they would need to become in order to deserve access to your heart again. This is the shift heaven wants you to notice. For so long, you may have been asking whether they would ever understand. But perhaps the deeper question was whether you would still recognize yourself by the time they did. You have changed too. You are no longer standing in the exact place where they left you emotionally. You have learned things about your boundaries. You have become clearer about what peace costs and what confusion steals. You know now that love can be intense and still require discernment. Your soulmate senses this change in you. It frightens them. But it also makes them respect you more. They know they cannot return expecting the same access. They know they cannot assume that because you once loved them deeply, you will automatically accept anything they offer now. Something about your energy has become less available to uncertainty. You may still care. You may still feel the connection. But there is a stronger voice inside you now saying, if you enter my life, enter truthfully. That voice is part of your growth. Do not silence it for nostalgia. And yet, do not harden your heart simply because you have been disappointed. There is a middle path between chasing someone and refusing to feel anything. It is called discernment. It allows you to remain open without abandoning yourself. It allows you to hear a person without surrendering your boundaries. It allows you to forgive without pretending nothing happened. That is where this message is leading you. Your soulmate's final message before midnight is not asking you to make an immediate promise. It is asking you to listen differently. Because they are preparing to say something you may not expect. For a long time, you assumed the biggest secret was how they felt about you. It is not. Their feelings are only the beginning. The deeper truth involves why they kept stopping themselves every time they came close to being honest. There is a part of their story they never explained because they were afraid it would sound like an excuse. And perhaps at one time, it would have been. But they are beginning to understand the difference between explaining a wound and using that wound to justify hurting someone else. They carry an old emotional memory that shaped how they respond when love becomes serious. Somewhere in their past, closeness became connected with loss, disappointment, abandonment, betrayal, instability, or the feeling that love could be withdrawn suddenly. They learned to read vulnerability as danger. They learned to stay partially guarded even when their heart wanted intimacy. Then you arrived. And you did not fit neatly into the pattern they knew. You saw through them more quickly than they expected. You noticed when their words and emotions did not match. You could sense the tenderness behind the walls. You made them feel seen, and being seen can be terrifying to someone who survived by being difficult to read. They loved that you could understand them. They feared it for the exact same reason. Because if you could see the beauty in them, you could also see the fear. And they were not ready for someone to stand that close to the truth. So when you asked for clarity, it touched wounds you did not create. When you needed reassurance, they sometimes heard pressure. When you wanted commitment, a younger and frightened part of them heard the possibility of future loss. None of this made your needs unreasonable. It simply reveals why the connection became tangled. Your soulmate understands this more clearly now because something happened recently that forced them to confront themselves. It may have been a conversation, a memory, a dream, a quiet night, a message they reread, or something another person said without realizing how deeply it would land. Whatever the trigger was, it cracked open a realization. They saw themselves from the outside. And they did not like what they saw. They recognized how many times they had expected you to understand what they never explained. They recognized how often they wanted reassurance from you while offering uncertainty in return. They recognized that they had sometimes made you pay emotionally for wounds you did not cause. That realization broke through their pride. And there was another moment after that, one even more powerful. They imagined you completely moving on. Not as a dramatic fantasy. Not as a jealousy game. They imagined your life becoming peaceful without them. They imagined you laughing freely with someone who does not make you guess. They imagined someone listening carefully the first time you explain what hurts. They imagined someone celebrating the parts of you they once took for granted. And something inside them became painfully clear. They had been assuming your heart would remain where they left it. But hearts grow. Lives change. People heal. Doors that once stood open can quietly become doors that require knocking. This is why the word final carries so much meaning tonight. They know they may be reaching the end of the version of this connection where everything remains undefined. Either they speak with honesty, or they accept that silence may choose the future for them. Either they confront their fear, or they watch fear make the decision. Either they approach you with maturity, or they release the expectation that you should continue waiting emotionally. And they know it. There is no anger in heaven toward either of you. There is only truth. You both had lessons to learn. You learned that loving someone does not mean carrying their emotional responsibility. They learned that being afraid does not give them permission to leave another person in confusion. You learned that silence can sometimes be an act of self-respect. They learned that silence can also become a form of loss. You learned that you can miss someone and still choose peace. They learned that missing someone after losing access to them feels very different from appreciating them while they are present. And now these lessons are meeting at the same doorway. But something is still hidden behind it. something they have not yet been brave enough to say. Your soulmate has drafted words in their mind more than once. They imagine how they would begin. They erase the sentence before speaking it. They wonder whether you would believe them. They wonder whether you would hear sincerity or simply hear another delayed explanation. They want to tell you that they are sorry, but apology is not the sentence keeping them awake. They want to tell you that they miss you, but that is not the deepest truth. They want to tell you that they still care, but even that is not the revelation making this message feel final. There is one sentence beneath all of those sentences. One confession they have resisted because saying it would destroy the story they have been telling themselves. The story that they had no choice. The story that circumstances alone separated you. The story that timing was the only problem. They finally know that is not entirely true. And before midnight, they are standing face to face with a confession that requires them to take responsibility. They are ready to admit that there was a moment when they could have chosen differently. There was a moment when they knew exactly what their heart wanted. There was a moment when they almost told you everything. But they stopped. Not because they did not care. Not because you were asking for too much. Not because the connection was imaginary. They stopped because someone, something, or some deeply rooted fear convinced them that choosing you would change their life in a way they were not prepared to face. And now they know that decision changed far more than they expected. What they have never told you is what happened immediately after that moment. Because after they walked away, after they remained silent, after they convinced themselves they had done the sensible thing, something occurred that made them realize they may have misunderstood the entire situation. They received information they were never supposed to hear. A truth about you. A truth about what you had been carrying quietly. A truth that made them sit in complete silence and rethink every assumption they had made about your heart. And when they finally understood why you had behaved the way you did, why you had needed reassurance, why you sometimes became quiet instead of explaining yourself again, they whispered something they had never allowed themselves to say before. They said, "I may have been wrong about everything." But even that was not the sentence that changed the night. Because moments later, they discovered one more detail. A detail connected to the very reason they had once been afraid to choose you. A detail that revealed someone had not told them the full truth. And when they realized what had been hidden from them, they reached for their phone, opened the message they had been afraid to send, and began writing the words that could change everything between you. The first line was an apology. The second was a confession. But the third line was something you never expected to hear from them. And before they could decide whether to send it, another message appeared on their screen, one that made them freeze, because the name attached to it was the last name they expected to see tonight.